We're live, are we?
We are now. We're live now.
Lovely, we're live. We're live. So, greetings, everybody.
Yeah, good evening, folks. It's a while since myself and Vinny did a video, but this was just too important that we had.
Well, it's been a while since you've invited me up to eat, so you know.
That's not true. Look at the size of them when I'm fading away.
You're fading away.
Yeah, so look, this was too important to let it go. We just couldn't let it go because people might think that this is actually real. Wait now, Vinny, and get you in there. There you go, yeah. So, it was too important to let go. So, Vin, do you want to introduce what this was?
Well, this was Senator Pauline O'Reilly. It was reported by Gript Media, who are doing some great work lately.
Green Party.
She's Green Party, and she's the interesting thing about her is she's alma mater, I think, a couple of universities. She's got degrees, all of that.
Yeah, she's loads of papers to say how smart she is.
Yeah,
we never got one of them.
No,
we never felt we needed one of them.
Well, we are smart, but you can't prove it on paper.
Oh, that's okay.
But at least I. Yeah. So, yeah, I'm sure she's a lovely woman, mother, and she does this thing with her children, not homeschooling, unschooling.
Yeah.
Now, if you look up unschooling...
I think she was unschooled herself.
Well, apparently she was in the Constitution. Because if you look up unschooling, it's considered a controversial thing. However, when we came across this is stunning. Do you want to maybe tell people, Ben, that the difference between the Constitution of being a sword and a shield?
Yeah, okay. So the Constitution is used as a shield and should be. The same with law. You use it as a shield when attacks come. The same as we're allowed to carry arms. Arms, defensive. Not allowed to carry weapons, though. No. Because a biro can be a weapon. I could stab Vin in the neck. But if my intent is to use the biro as a weapon, that's a problem. So that's why you use it as a shield. And if we deal with the Constitution... Well, let's deal with her first. What does she say?
Well, let's say what she said, right?
There's 3 paragraphs, so we do it one at a time. How about
that?
Think about it. All law, all legislation is about the restriction of freedom. That's exactly what we're doing here, is we are restricting freedom, but we're doing it for the common good. You will see throughout our Constitution, yes, you have rights, but they are restricted for the common good. Everything needs to be balanced. And if your views on other people's identities go to make their lives unsafe, insecure, and cause them such deep discomfort that they cannot live in peace, then I believe that it is our job as legislators to restrict those freedoms for the common good.
Well, supportive of the bill. So this is the hate speech legislation, right?
Proposed.
Yeah, I'll read this as verbatim as possible. So she said, when one thinks about it, all law and all legislation is about the restriction of freedom. This is exactly what we are doing here. We are restricting freedom, but we are doing it for the common good.
Now that's nice, isn't it, Vin? To restrict freedoms for the common good.
Does that make you feel warm and fuzzy inside?
All wuzzy and fuzzy, What if the greater good wants all my freedoms gone? Yeah. Or what if the greater good would need it?
So take the first part there.
Yeah.
All law and legislation is about restriction of freedom. Is that true or false?
That's absolutely false.
Please explain to the good people.
Legislation is about protection of everything, your property rights, your good name. That's why we have defamation laws. It's all about protection. The Protection of the Dwelling Act meant you could shoot someone in the head if they entered your home and you thought they were going to do damage to your family and kids if they entered as a trespasser. So legislation is all about protection of your rights, not about protection of the burglar's rights, because he's none once he's breaking in.
So it's not so the laws and legislation, our intention is to enhance freedom, would you say? Enhance
and protect freedoms, not restrict. So this is what happens, folks, by the way, when you vote for TDs that believe this way. Then the next line, she says, Vin, this is exactly what we are doing here. Right, so now she recognises that what they're doing in the hate speech bill is to restrict freedoms. She's making no bones about this.
No bones whatsoever.
I mean, the girl, as Finn said, I don't know her, she might be a lovely woman, but
sure.
I mean, she's absolutely misguided on this. And then she says, the last sentence on that is, we are restricting freedom, but we are doing it for the common good. So,
kaboom, now.
This is interesting, isn't it?
Preamble, folks, preamble. Wouldn't you just love it if
Yeah.
all these so-called educated people did?
That they'd actually read the Constitution, and at least the preamble.
How much? Maybe they can't afford it.
Oh, I don't know. I got this free online. I just printed it off now.
Oh, of course, yeah.
So, just so you know, the preamble, right? The preamble is basically setting out the story of how we got here, what the Constitution, what the goal of the Constitution is, and why we then adopt it for ourselves.
Yeah.
And the articles are basically how we get there, all the steps. But the preamble is about what the Constitution is for,
Yeah.
what's its goal. So, Vinny, give us the goal. One of the big goals
Okay.
here I'm looking at.
Well, I won't read the whole thing.
No, just the goal there that we
So,
highlighted.
but third paragraph down, or fourth paragraph down, we the people of Ireland, yada 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 yada, and seeking to promote the common good.
Okay, so same thing.
She's
promote.
acting as if they can enforce common good whether you want it or
Yeah.
not, or
Oh,
what they believe to be the
yeah,
common
and
good.
what she's saying is, well, look, we're doing this. We're restricting rights for the common good.
Right.
Okay.
Now-
Freedoms, she said.
Yeah.
That's why the word is very important, because it deals with freedom here now.
Right.
Okay.
So I'll read the paragraph. So, and seeking to promote the common good with due observance to prudence, justice, and charity, so that
No.
the dignity and freedom of the individual may be assured.
Right.
Yes.
Now, the words here, so that, Vin, give a little thing on that, the so that.
Well, that's like with the LGBTQP way.
Right.
So it's like when you're talking about somebody, if you're from woke circles.
Yeah.
So you go through the checklist. Whether they're gay, straight, coloured,
Pretend.
not coloured, or people of colour.
Yeah.
So and then it's like, well, yeah, you square it by their
Yeah.
sexuality, you divide it by the gender, and you multiply it by the
Yeah.
inverse
So
negative
that-
rule. I don't know.
Yeah.
It's bonkers.
But basically what they're saying here in the Constitution is that we are seeking to promote the common good, right? So that's okay. It's the common good we're trying to promote, and with due observance of prudence, justice, and charity. But the so that, so it's for the common good, but here's the purpose, so that something is going to happen, right? And it says so that the dignity and freedom of the individual may be assured. That's what the common good is designed for.
So, yeah,
it's so that.
We've seen loads of people Ben out there say, "Oh, the common good can be used by tyrants because they just claim it's in the common good."
No.
But the preamble of the 1937,
Yeah.
it's absolutely crystal clear that is the function and purpose of the promotion of
That's right,
the
of
common good.
achieving the
Not
common
in-
good.
Yeah.
That's right. In other words, if we are to achieve or promote the common good, it is only for, because it says so that the freedom of the individual may be assured. It's an assurance. Now, let's go back to what poor old Pauline says in her second paragraph, right? Because what she says is, throughout our Constitution, one can see that while one, the individual, has rights, they are restricted for the common good.
No.
No,
No.
it's absolutely the opposite. We just read the preamble of to get the common good. It's so that the freedom of the individual may be assured. She's turning this on its head.
And where's her prudence, justice, and charity and dignity in
Yeah.
her? And
There's nothing there.
these people have lost their minds. They've lost control of
Absolutely,
themselves. They really have.
These are the same people that think cows farting is a problem. Let me
Yeah.
just tell you that, folks, right? But not cats, dogs, sheep, dinosaurs.
These people can't even tell you what a woman is.
Yeah. So having though thought about the preamble of the Constitution, right, and knowing now that the whole idea for the Constitution in achieving a common good was for the very purpose that the rights and freedom of the individual could be assured, she turns it on her head by saying, and this is exactly what we're doing. So she says, one can see from the Constitution that while one has rights, they are restricted for the common good.
I mean, she almost like you didn't have some rights. I mean,
Yeah, yeah.
but they're irritating them apparently.
Yeah, they're irritating us and we can jump on them for the common good. No,
Yeah.
no. The common good is not the goal as such. It was for the assurance of the individual's freedom. And by doing that, you achieve a common good. And the reason for that is because if I trample on Mr. Burns' rights, then it means we're trampling on everybody's rights.
Yes.
So if you don't assure the rights of the individual, you can't trample on everybody's individual rights and then say, collectively now all of your rights are upheld because we're trampling on them individually.
Well, that is the big thing here, because seemingly all these people are operating on a view that with this hate speech legislation, we have all these special classes of persons now,
Yeah.
legal classes of persons, that apparently have more rights than you and I.
Yeah.
And that's communist style thinking.
Yeah.
Whatever way you want to slice it and dice it. It's thinking that the collective somehow has more rights than the individual.
That's
and
right.
our constitution, the 1937 constitution, is crystal clear
Yeah.
that is absolutely not the case.
And you've got to remember, Pauline should have taken an oath of office before entering office to uphold the Constitution. And to be honest, all politicians should know what at least the preamble says.
At least the preamble.
So it's not very big, the preamble, and you should know what it is, because then you know that that's what the articles in the Constitution are set to achieve. And the only reason she can be a senator and get wages is because of the very existence of the preamble and our Constitution.
Yep.
So she's happy enough to take the wages, but she thinks that it is to restrict freedoms of the individual so the common good can be achieved, which is absolutely
Here's
wrong.
the one that I love. The last line of the preamble.
Yeah.
Do hereby adopt, enact and give to ourselves this constitution.
That's right.
Is she seriously trying to convince us we've given to ourselves
This, so our rights can be
oppressive
trampled on.
regimes and rights to be yeah. Like, come on now, folks. Come on.
So let me go on. She said everything needs to be balanced. Correct. But she says if a person's views on other person's identities make their lives unsafe and insecure and cause them such deep discomfort that they cannot live in peace, our job as legislators is to restrict the freedoms for the common good.
Those
Now-
freedoms.
No, those
That's
freedoms.
not true.
No,
That's
absolutely.
a lie.
Now, look, let me just put it this way.
Even if it were true, that would require a referendum.
Of course, it's absolutely nonsense. Let's say, for instance, Vincent now puts on a dress and he identifies now as, what's a female, Vincent?
Loretta.
Loretta.
I want to be called Loretta.
I want to have a baby.
Sorry, that's a Monty Python reference.
Okay, so he wants to identify as a woman, so he puts on a dress. He's going to need a wig as well, by the way. But let's say he just puts on.
Don't you oppress me?
I'm not oppressing you. You can't tell it. So anyway, look, he wants to be a woman. There's no issue. You know, let him be a woman. But if I don't recognise him as a woman, I could be deemed, right, to make his life unsafe and insecure and cause them such deep discomfort that he cannot live in peace. Now, first of all, if he puts on a dress and thinks he's a woman, the psychological issues, he should be getting proper treatment for that, right? Instead, if I say, look, then I just can't accept that you're a woman, he can then say, you're making me feel unsafe and I can't live in peace. So now my rights are going to be restricted, that I can't say but he's a man.
Well, here's the other crux, which again, this is what a lot of people feel as well. I think is that if it makes me uncomfortable and causes me deep
You only have to
discomfort
say it.
in my life,
Yeah.
no, but in my life, I can't say jack about it because I'm not considered one of the special classes of
Oh, that's
persons.
right. Yeah.
So there's your two-tier system,
Yeah.
and that's specifically what it's designed for,
Yeah.
right?
So look, I'm all, for, transgender, man wants to identify as a woman,
Sure.
that's great. But please don't force me to accept it.
No.
Like, for the same reason I don't talk to schizophrenics' imaginary friends is the same reason I can't accept that a man is a woman because he pulls on a dress. It's a mental illness. But in any event, we'll keep going on, right?
Yep.
She then says, and this is the really funny bit, our job as legislators is to restrict those freedoms for the common good. Now, I don't know what common good she's talking about, but it's not the common good of the preamble.
Oh, I think that's an error. She meant communist good.
Oh, communist good, yeah, because that's what it must be. Because what it says here is seeking to promote the common good, that the freedom of the individual may be assured. That's my freedoms. The guy, Vinny, has already got the freedom to say he's a woman if he wants. He has that freedom. But just because I don't accept it, that's my freedom for reality. He has freedom to live in an unreal, imaginary world if he wants. I chose reality. My freedoms then can't be abused to make him feel all soft.
Look at
and
this.
fluffy.
Here's an experiment somebody could do. Get a big box of Smarties, all the different colour Smarties. Chuck them into a bucket and agree beforehand that you're only going to protect the rights of any of the red and green Smarties.
I see here Michael Keaton says, wait till they use aliens as a way to restrict us to the common good.
They're already doing it. Just they're illegal aliens.
Yeah.
But anyway.
Anyway,
No,
look.
but the point I'm making is, so if I say, okay, all red and green Smarties,
Yeah.
they have these extra special, the red and green Smartie rights,
Yeah.
okay? But the other Smarties, they don't have those rights. And if those other Smarties upset the red and green Smarties,
Yeah. I mean, like, this is really a nonsense, folks, So, but anyway, she says that our job is to restrict the freedoms of the common good, right? Now, the last paragraph you deal with that there. Read that out when you see this.
one cannot do and say whatever one likes in our society,
Wrong.
which is a society governed by laws. This is very fundamental to a legislative system.
Wrong.
It should be one of the very fundamentals for any legislators who sit in this chamber, that they understand what we do is restrict freedoms.
Okay. Now, I can already see her poster for her next election.
Vote for me, I'll restrict your freedoms.
Vote for me, I'll trample on every right you ever had. I don't remember that on our poster. I thought they all said we'd be a strong voice for you and your rights, and we'll be a strong voice. Remember
Strong
all
voice to restrict our freedoms. What?
Yeah, we'll be a strong voice to restrict our freedoms. Imagine actually saying this in the chamber. She stood up and said this. There's a video of it on the Gripped Twitter feed.
Yeah,
there.
go have a look at that Gripped video.
If you want to see it. She says, first of all, one cannot do and say whatever one likes in our society, which is government law.
You can.
Actually, you can. And that's the idea. Let's say that I'm saying now we have a fear that men might rape women. So for the common good, we're going to lock up all men.
Yep.
What's the difference?
No difference.
It's a right that men can be out and free.
Yeah. Well, I mean, you're walking the streets and you have the equipment with you. You know what I mean? That's all I'm
that's
saying.
right.
You have the tools with you.
You're going equipped.
Yeah,
So look, think of the logic of this. So I have the right. If I see a little old one crossing the road there, I can pick up, it's a 2x1, and I can smash her across the head if I wish. That's a right that I possess.
Yep.
But with all powers comes responsibilities. If I do that, I have to face the consequence of that. And that's why there's laws in place to deal with the consequence of doing something, right? So,
see, they're saying the same thing about saying something to somebody, that it's as if it's a physical assault.
Yeah, it's not.
That's what they're trying to do.
Well,
they say, well, you said, like, what happened to sticks and stones?
no, that's right, yeah. I mean, it's a complete and utter nonsense.
It's a
And the
farce.
same way you can't say whatever you like, you can. Loads of people have said things about me. And, sometimes I get upset and sometimes they're not true, but sometimes they're defamatory, right? And the law takes care of that. I mean, a newspaper settled with me there not too long ago because they said something defamatory. But if somebody says, you're a gobshite or you're this, that causes me great discomfort. Oh, I can't sleep right. I can't live in peace after that. What have I got to do?
Well, apparently all you have to do is now
They can all go to jail. Oh, no.
ring Pauline. And,
Pauline, they're at it again. They've called me an asshole on Facebook like they normally do. So I want them to go to jail. And she'll answer, oh, you're not one of the special groups.
well, if you say, but I am now,
Yeah.
and it's
Oh,
now
that's
upsetting
right.
me,
Hold on, yeah.
now they go to jail.
Yeah.
So how can that be? You only have to feel, the person who's complaining has to say, I feel this way about it, and now you're in jail. They don't,
Of
you're
course,
not.
there's
It's
another,
a nonsense.
there's
It's
another
an
problem with this protected groups, because part of the Constitution says that we're all equal in the eyes of the law.
before the law.
So how's there special groups getting special protections?
Yeah.
Look, I'm all for special groups getting special. It's people with special needs and the elderly, and we're brought up in a society where
Well, not special attention, but the proper
That's
attention
right.
that's required.
That's
Absolutely.
right. Yeah. And if you're not raised like that, though, let's say an elderly person gets on a bus and she's a bit wobbly, and I stand up and give her my seat. That's great. I was raised that way. But I don't go to jail if I decided not to do it. I'm just an ignoramus, maybe, or whatever.
Yeah.
But society has to just put up with that, suck it up, and continue. You can't legislate for that.
Here's the
You know?
question, Ben. What class of lofty tower do these people live in?
I don't know.
I mean, you use the expression farting through silk, but I mean...
Yeah. I just don't know what it is. Now, the problem, of course, with our complete government, it doesn't matter if it's the Greens in party, Sinn Féin, the Paul Murphy woke brigade, they're all far left woke.
Oh.
And that's what this is about. This is about bringing in our crazy woke agenda. And if you say anything against anybody, even the deluded, then you could go to jail. And that's the only way we can get all this to go through.
Well, I remember nearly 14 years ago when we were doing internet radio at first, I was telling people to please go read the 10 planks of the Communist Manifesto and realise I think 8.5 to 9 of them were in place back then. This is one of the last elements on the last plank of the Communist Manifesto. Once they got this, they just think about what they can get after this.
Yeah. And of course, another problem for poor old Pauline, we seem to be having a go at her, but we're not really having a go at her. We're just having a go at what she said. I'm sure she's a
Yeah, we're not saying she's stupid, just what she said was stupid.
Yeah.
Right. Right?
Right. Now, hold on, run that by me again. I think you were right, but I just want to make sure he didn't call her stupid, right?
No.
I mean, you heard him, he didn't say that.
I just said what she said was stupid.
That's right, and that's a difference.
go.
Right? She's probably most intelligent, but she just said something stupid. She said a whole lot stupid, if you ask me. But anyway, so people need to understand that what we do is restrict freedoms.
Yeah.
I want to see our next poster. I'm going to design her poster. Here,
We do it as a favour for here's some suggestions.
You know the way you good people out there, you're great at doing these things, memes. Please somebody do up a poster for Pauline for our next election. Vote for me. Whatever rights you have left by the time the election comes around, I'll make sure we trample down.
That must be why you didn't get elected, because you weren't using the word to smash things. You should have been saying, you should have been pointing a Kalashnikov at the people saying, vote for me or else.
Yeah, that's
I'll
right.
take more of your rights. There you go.
No, I should have said, while I point out all your rights, I'll take them off you individually.
Yeah,
one by
I'll take
one.
this right. Check. I'll take that right. Check. Think you have a right to go to the bathroom on your own? Check.
We shouldn't really be laughing at this because it's so serious.
You should go insane if you don't.
Yeah, that's right. Look, it's so stupid.
Yeah, it's crazy.
Really, this is so stupid that I just don't know what else to say. Imagine somebody in government or in the Senate where the laws have to pass through actually believes for one moment that her very role in there is to restrict the freedoms of the people. I mean,
That's
even
bizarre.
communist China won't come
That's
out and
like
say that's our
no, that's
job.
like a doctor saying, I'm here to disimprove the health of my patients. It's that bad.
I know.
It really is.
I mean, I just don't know what she was thinking. And like, I mean,
But they're all for it.
yeah, they're all for it, and she actually thinks that that's what her role is. God help us, because if this is contagious in there, I mean, this is the position they really take. If she really thinks that's her job, and she's talking to other members of the House in there, imagine that that's what they actually think. And that's why, we need to change this government real quick and real fast and change the attitudes of these people, because they have no idea of the Constitution. The rights contained therein are referred to therein. The Constitution doesn't actually give you rights.
No, of course.
And the last thing I want to say is the rights of the family that are recognised in the Constitution. And this is why the legislative stuff never really bothers me, because, as I always said, if you only learn one article of the Constitution, it should be 41.11, and that's to do with the family. And what it says is that the family's rights are superior and
Antecedent
and
to all positive
superior
law.
to all positive law. So this is going to be positive law when it comes out.
Yeah.
But we should still stop it. We can't have people in government who think that their role in government is to trample on your rights. Imagine.
Well, here's the problem. As you say, look, we know, and everybody knows we know about, we've expressed opinions on what is
Yeah.
correct and incorrect in regard to constitutions, de jure,
Yeah.
de facto, all of that stuff. However, 99.99% of the people who are living on the island with us, all they know is this. That's all they know. And what comes out of that one-eyed monster in the corner of the room, that's all they know. What they hear on RTE, LMFM, all the other radio stations. They hear
Which
the
is
same
why we do-
crap. This is why we're doing this.
Yeah.
I mean, this is not. We're not here to argue about the rights of this and the wrongs of
No.
that. We're saying, how can she possibly be right,
When you read the preamble.
even according to what they say?
Yeah.
How could she possibly be?
Big shout out to Pauline there, listening from Liverpool. We've actually a lot of fans in Liverpool. I don't know if you know that.
Hey.
Yeah, we've got a lot of fans in Liverpool. Hey,
Hey.
calm
Hey.
down.
Hey.
Calm down.
Not anymore. Not
Yeah,
now. We're fucked that. Right?
We've just lost a load of fans in Liverpool. Calm down.
There goes the
So,
last one.
yeah, so look, folks, we just had to come on and say that. I hope we've made that a little bit clear, even though we do it in a jovial manner, because as Vinny says, you have to laugh at this.
Yeah.
But imagine in any country in the world where one of the politicians will come out live on camera and say, people need to know that our job is to restrict your rights.
Yeah.
Mind-boggling. Mind-boggling.
Bonkers.
But we expect nothing else from the Green Party. They really have gone bizarre on us, haven't they, folks? So, It's a good night from him.
And a good night from him.
Cathaoirleach, I want to welcome the Minister here and welcome her back to active duty. I also want to move the amendment in my name, which is to postpone the consideration of the second stage until the end of the year. But I want to do it on this basis only, that it was only proposed on the basis that we aren't going to rush this thing through. And if I have satisfactory assurances that we're not going to rush it through, then I don't particularly want to push that amendment towards the end of the second stage debate. Yeah. So there's a number of things I want to say. Senator Ward, in a bullion style, and decided to commence his contribution here on the basis that most of the criticism of this bill was nonsense. Well, I don't accept that, and I don't accept that. I accept that much of the criticism of this bill is nonsense, and that a lot of keyboard warriors have written exaggerated and overblown criticisms of the bill and the threat it is to our society. I accept that proposition. But when the Irish Council of Civil Liberties says that there are problems with this bill which haven't yet been addressed, it's not nonsense to say that we must consider it very carefully. And when there are other faults with the legislation which appear to some of us, at any rate, to be serious faults, then I don't think it's fair to dismiss the matter as nonsense. Senator Pauline O'Reilly said that, all rights can be limited in the interest of the common good. That isn't the test. The Constitution is different. The Constitution actually guarantees rights. And what this House believes about the common good is not the test as to the extent to which those rights can be curtailed. And in particular, in relation to the freedom of speech and the free expression of views, it is only subject to public order and morality. That is the test. And you may want to have a kinder society, as Senator Eileen Flynn spoke about. You may want to have a better society, a society where we're kinder and more decent to each other. Those things are undoubtedly part of the common good, but they do not justify. They do not justify. A kind society is not, and a moral society are not necessarily the same thing. I'm telling you that. You can be unkind, offensive. Free speech sometimes is offensive to other people, and people legitimately cause offence and take offence from free speech. And it is a guarantee of free speech without the right to offend has been on many occasions described by people right across civilization as worthless. And the same applies to minority opinions. Now, the second thing I want to say about this is that this legislation proposes to criminalise some behaviour, and in particular, Section 7 says that if you behave in a public place that is likely to incite violence or hatred against a person or persons on account of their protected characteristics, and you do so with intent to incite violence or hatred against such a person, or reckless as to whether your behaviour will cause that kind of reaction, you're liable to be, you commit an offence which is punishable by 5 years imprisonment. And as a result of that, two things happen under the Criminal Law Act of 1997. A member of An Garda Síochána can arrest you and detain you and bring you to a Garda station where you can be detained under the provisions of the Criminal Justice Act of 1984. And secondly, any citizen can arrest you if he or she believes that you are actually committing an offence under the section. So to create such an offence without actually it being clear to everyone what is or is not constituted by the term hatred is very dangerous indeed. Because some people may say this behaviour, say outside a synagogue, was calculated to cause hatred to the Jewish population who were using their synagogue. And attempt an arrest, or a member of An Garda Síochána may do so in the same circumstance. And we are here putting in place the legal basis for those arrests to be carried out and for detention of people to happen on the basis of the view taken as to whether there is reasonable cause in the mind of an ordinary citizen or a member of An Garda Síochána that they are witnessing the commission of an offence under this Act. Now, is it reasonable to accept the word of two Attorneys General that it would complicate things if we attempt to define the term hatred? And as a former Attorney General myself, I see that it probably would complicate prosecution. And it would possibly do what the Minister said it would do, make it more difficult to prosecute in some cases. And why would it do that? If you define hatred as being a particular level of intense opprobrium or disgust or some other formula which was proposed in Dáil Éireann, are you saying that something less than that will suffice for hatred? I mean, in the last analysis, if a definition of hatred is provided, a judge is going to determine whether the prosecution has or has not established it. But to say to members of An Garda Síochána, to members of the public who have a power of arrest, to say to them, I don't want to define hatred because everyone knows what it means, is a very bold statement to make indeed. And the funny thing is, it's not just me that's saying that. The United Nations Human Rights Commission has specifically stated that if you're going to criminalise incitement to hatred, that you should define the term hatred and indeed the term incitement. And I mean, this is part of what are called the Rabat Plan of Action, which was adopted in October 2012. So it's not just me saying, I want a definition of hatred. Hatred is something which could mean an awful lot to an awful lot of different people. I mean, Senator Flynn spoke recently about the necessity for this legislation by reference to a particularly repugnant incident in which he was involved in relation to a taxi journey. But was there hatred involved? She might have thought there was hatred by the driver towards her. But on the other hand, is it an objective test? And at what stage should a judge say, this is what the legislature meant when it prohibited behaviour likely to incite hatred? There are other points that I want to make and will make in the course of, and I intend to put down a fair few amendments, because I also want to stress one thing, Minister. The 1989 Act is clearly past its sell-by date. It's not because there haven't been enough prosecutions under it, but because it belongs to a different era where it's to do with what happens in public spaces and outside the home and doesn't take into account the internet at all. And I do accept that we must now modernise our law to stop rabid anti-Semitism being spread via the internet with a view to causing hatred against Jews and other religious and racial minorities. But can I say one thing about this? Every time I hear people talking about hatred and violence and the like, I haven't heard many of the NGOs who complain about this talking about the violence and threats of violence that are levelled at people like Mary Kenny, the journalist. The threat of violence if she went to Limerick to speak to the students. The riot squads that have to be deployed to protect some people because they want to exercise their right of free speech. And, violence and the threat of violence, and I echo what Senator Mullen said, in the days of a cancel culture, violence and the threat of violence is not a one-way street. The amount of vile vituperation against people by members of minorities and protected minorities and a self-appointed spokesman for particular varieties of protected minority, launched anonymously at people who they say are homophobes, transphobes and the like on the media, on the social media, are significant. And I don't hear protestations that they need protection from anybody. They're only being attacked, whether they're authors or lecturers or whatever, they're only being attacked for expressing a view, say, on the subject of trans gender, and as to whether it is or is not a viable concept. They're only being attacked for their views on that matter. In the most trenchant terms, they're being cancelled. They're near riots if they go to speak in places, hotel meetings being held in secret lest they be disrupted. And who is standing up to speak for freedom of speech? And if we bring in a law which says that somebody stands up in public and a member of An Garda Síochána or a member of the public who has a camera and takes a clip of what has been said, has the right to detain that person. Who is going to say that there isn't going to be a chilling effect, especially when there are people who will actually resort to violence to prevent people articulating a view hostile to theirs? Now, in the last half minute that I have, I just want to say this. This bill needs to be amended. It isn't in good shape. It emerged from the Dáil Éireann on a wave of generalised support. And it has come before us in a state where it can be a charter for freezing genuine free speech and prevent people from articulating unpopular views, such as J.K. Rowling's views, or whatever they are. She's entitled to express her views and not to be arrested by a citizen or by a guard. And the whole idea of saying, oh, well, when it comes to court, she'll have all her protections. Going to court to defend your remarks in public and being acquitted is a pretty horrific experience for most people. And most people will take many, many steps to avoid the danger of being prosecuted and shut their mouths. And it's been referred to in this House by Deputy Chambers, or Senator Chambers, that people in this House feel constrained about what they can say on certain topics because on both sides outside there is such a violent reaction on the social media and in the conventional media. So I want to say this. I have no objection to this bill being brought forward because the 1989 legislation is in need of radical overhauling. I have no objection to a bill preventing the abuse of free speech to create a violent threat against minorities in our society. But this bill must be gone through line by line and with huge care to ensure that it doesn't have the effect of having people dragged before courts by citizens and members of An Garda Síochána who have a particular view of what is or is not hatred because we were too lazy to define our terms. Thank you.
In our future life and work here in the Oireachtas. My concerns on this bill are primarily to do with legal and constitutional issues. And I have a deep concern that Article 38(1) of our Constitution, which states that no person shall be tried on any criminal charge save in the due course of law. There's a shift of the burden of proof here which I have concerns about and will have difficulty in supporting same. Continuing that, Article 46(1) of the Irish Constitution states that you have a right to freely express your convictions and opinions. I think there's a conflict there. Article 10(1) of the European Convention on Human Rights says that everyone has the right to freedom of expression. That right shall include the freedom to hold opinions, to receive and impart information and ideas without interference by public authority. Article 10(2) of the European Convention provides to be permissible that any restriction on freedom of expression must pursue one of the aims recognised as legitimate and necessary in a democratic society. Minister, I fully recognise that even though we are a very tolerant and diverse society by and large, there are appalling instances, Minister, which you have referred to that have happened. But my concern is, and I think it's a fair concern, that do we use a sledgehammer to crack an ugly nut? And I don't think we should. I don't in any way condone things that have happened in your county and in other places. I think they're appalling. They must be condemned. But however, to legislate in such a way as this bill, however well intended, I think have major conflicts. The conflicts with our own constitution, and even though I mightn't be as well qualified as others here, I started studying law in 1972, and I've almost 30 years here in this house is between the Dáil and the Shannon. And I feel that if the constitutional conflicts are as such that I believe sincerely are there, then I'm absolutely certain this will be contested in the Supreme Court on a constitutional basis, and furthermore may be taken to the European Court of Human Rights. And I have great worries that in both of those courts that such a challenge could very well be successful. In actual fact, the slant, or I suppose the conflict with the Irish Constitution is so strong in this instance that I think it warrants, and maybe this is a far-reaching view, Minister, that should we consider having a referendum on changing our Constitution pre-legislation? One might say that this is a strong stance, but I think maybe the people of this country should have a view and have a vote as to where we're going in this regard. I think that if you study other other legislatures, I looked at the Scottish law, whereas it's similar in many ways. It doesn't impinge on the rights that I've already outlined. I have grave worries that the bill as drafted does not have the intended consequences that many who have spoken believes it has. And I think it was rushed through the Dáil, and I'm saying that not in any way lightly. And I'm very concerned that this bill will be also rushed here, because the view I'm getting is that at all costs this legislation has to be passed before the summer recess, which is, I think, 4 weeks from Thursday, that's about 12 sitting days. We also have to deal, apart from the second reading, we have other stages of the bill which have to be dealt with. And I would appeal to you, Minister, that, let us look at this in the cold light of day. Let us have second stage here today. And I have reservations. I may allow this go through because we have to have second stage, but I have reservations, sincere and deeply held ones, that if we proceed in rushing this through in the few days, 12 working days that's left, hugely important and significant legislation that impacts many lives and many people in different ways, then I will have great reluctance in putting my name to this legislation before it's completely finished and before the final stage is knuckled down to. And my concerns are sincerely held, they are deeply held, and I have only on 3 occasions in my almost 30 years here have I stood up to issues of importance to me, mainly against my own government, and I'm not going to go into those, but three I suppose, contests with the government and the parties that I was involved with in coalition otherwise in 30 years is not a bad record. So I'm not being an oddball, I hope not, but I have deep concerns here, and I'm certainly not satisfied with I'm satisfied with the intent of what you're trying to achieve, but the manner it's how it's being done is of deep worry to me, primarily on constitutional rights, and that's what I've kind of I've honed in on. I've read the Bunrock na Héireann again. I've gone through the articles that I quoted, and I'm not happy at all in this little head of mine that we're actually achieving what we're setting out to, and in actual fact we might be going down a cul-de-sac that we might find it hard to recover from, and that we may be embarrassed in our own Supreme Court, and furthermore possibly embarrassed in the European Court of Human Rights. And I would ask you, Minister, to maybe stand back a little and give us all time to reflect on this where it is important in many ways. It's, I think, rushing legislation through is not a good thing ever. And I honestly say with hand in heart that what I've seen and watched in Dáil Éireann, that in the other house, in the lower house to be precise, this legislation didn't get due consideration, and that troubles me.
Those as freely as we would have done in the past. Even to be in possession of material without even sharing it. Anybody can get a knock on the door, a warrant from the Gardaí, they can come in, search my home, search everybody that's in my home, take all their devices, take all our computers, take any material that is relevant to them that they see to be relevant to the case.
Taoiseach Leo Varadkar recently said that some of the submissions through public consultation tend to have a kind of a coordinated aspect to them. In your experience of the concern from the public that you've seen expressed through emails, what is that like? Is it actually, does it seem like it's coordinated, or does it seem more organic?
It's definitely more organic, and certainly you would, during maybe the mother and babies homes, legislation that came through the Shannon and the Dáil, a lot of those emails would have been copy and paste. This particular legislation that's going through the Shannon at this moment in time, or will come before the Shannon within the next month, definitely all the emails that are coming in at this moment in time are all individualised. I'd say maybe 2 to 3% of them would be copy and paste, but the rest of them are all individualised with names at the bottom. Some have even got addresses and telephone numbers. So the public are very concerned about this, and my advice is to anybody that is concerned, remember the power lies now with the senators, and particularly those senators that are in power, the Fianna Fáil senators, the Fine Gael senators and the Green Party senators. So they are the people that need to be lobbied here. And indeed the Sinn Féin senators, because they voted too for this bill. So if you are annoyed about what's going to happen and the future that you're going to have in relation to free speech in this country, you need to get active. And you need to get active and engage with your local senator in your county and ask them how they're going to vote on this legislation. And are they going to put down any amendments to it?
What is the likelihood of there being heavy amendments to it?
I think a lot of the amendments will come from the opposition sides. I can't see very many amendments coming from the government side. I could be surprised by that. There are some very good senators there, the likes of Barry Wall, Mary Seary Carney. They may see what we are seeing at this moment in time and decide to put down their own amendments on what we've seen, and the government will likely take their amendments more so than ours. But, I welcome amendments from the government parties here on this. I welcome them to get engaged, see how this legislation can be improved. It either has to be improved or it has to be scrapped.
What is your chief concern with the bill, the way it is worded at the moment?
It's very chilling for those of us that may have opinions and views that we certainly can't express those as freely as we would have done in the past. Even to be in possession of material without even sharing it. I can get a knock on the door, or anybody can get a knock on the door, a warrant from the Gardaí, they can come in, search my home, search everybody that's in my home, take all their devices, take all our computers, take any material that is relevant to them that they see to be relevant to the case. I then, or an individual then, has to prove themselves innocent. These cases don't come before the courts for maybe 2.5 years. We know how taken up the courts are at this moment in time with the number of cases that are there, and it'll be 2.5 years before you'd even hear a case, and that's far too long for anybody to prove their innocence in a matter like this. And then if they're found guilty, then it's like €5,000 fine or a year in prison. So I think this legislation that they're bringing in is certainly just to try and keep those that have dissent on government issues to keep us quiet.
I congratulate you on your return, and I congratulate you on the joy that led to your absence. I want to quote something to you. I believe my new hate crime and hate speech bill will contribute in a very real way to allowing everybody in Ireland to live without fear, to live the most authentic version of themselves. Minister, that's something that you tweeted on the day that you introduced this bill in the Dáil. I don't think you tweeted it today, and it would be very strange if you did, because what your bill has done in a very real way is to contribute to a lot of ordinary people's fear that there is no longer, and there will no longer be clarity if this legislation passes about what they may or may not say in terms of robust freedom of expression not intended to harm people, but expression that might certainly offend people, and indeed expression that could well be called a hate, as such expression frequently is. The Minister, in regard to that very word hate, which is at the core of the bill, and I want to say first of all that the sensible thing for you to do here would be to separate out the hate crime dimension of this bill, which is what you say we need to get done in line with international standards. You would get that through in a heartbeat. And if you're seriously interested in consultation, you would cut that off and put that through, and we could return on another occasion then to tease out the issues of hate speech, because fundamentally it's not the incitement to violence that worries anybody here. We're all against that. We're all against hate crime, or we accept what you're seeking to achieve in that area. It is the incitement to hatred dimension of this bill, because the bill leaves hate undefined. And I wonder, why is that, Minister? Your predecessor reminded us that the Department of Justice's view was that hatred is a commonly understood concept in law. Minister Harris says he did not wish to be overly prescriptive because he wants to avoid, quote, the unintended consequence of actually raising the bar for successful prosecution. Without any further guidance, we can only presume that the current Garda understanding of hate will apply, and that definition currently is, in relation to non-crime incidents, is any non-crime incident which is perceived by any person to, in whole or in part, be motivated by hostility or prejudice. Is that to be the subjective standard for investigating and harassing citizens? Any incident perceived by any person to be motivated by prejudice? Is this bill to be a licence for cranks and for the easily offended? I hear Senator Ward, trust me, I'm a barrister, approach to this legislation. Well, frankly, to paraphrase Ronald Reagan to Mikhail Gorbachev, let me tell you why we don't trust you. Because you come in here with college debate level denigration of sincere concerns of many, many people. Concerns that have been forcefully and relatively articulately expressed by a broad range of people in recent times. And your response is to denigrate them and then to tell us as rubbish, and then to tell us that you will listen carefully nonetheless to what is proposed. No, I certainly won't. Listening to your office, Minister, one would think that this bill, you say that this bill is about tackling extreme forms of hate. Your officials seek to reassure the public, but it's not. It's about tackling anything understood as hate, be it mild or extreme. You used words in page 5 and 6 of your own speech here to reassure us that you reiterate it's been drafted to criminalise only the extreme not mentioned in the bill, that deliberately not mentioned in the bill, incite or stir up not mentioned in the bill. You use language. I can't understand why your officials put that in your speech, because to ordinary, and I'm not accusing you of anything here, but that is a deception to use language like that when it is not in the bill. So, Minister, your presentation of the bill at second stage to the Dáil and the reassuring language, some of which you've repeated again now here, it's just not there in the language of the bill. You said at the time, while individuals can hold and express opinions that others might find offensive or shocking, I want to make it clear that it's the extreme, as I just said, stir up, just not in the bill. You have lowered the threshold, and indeed you say that that is your intent, or certainly the government has been saying it wants more prosecutions. So, you will understand and know, Minister, that there are international understandings in this regard. From the Council of Europe in September 2022, measures to combat hate speech should be appropriate and proportionate to the level of severity of its expression. Some expressions of hate speech warrant a criminal law response, while others call for a civil or administrative law response, or should be dealt with through measures of non-legal nature. Nothing of that here. You've gone for the extreme end of social sanction, namely the criminal law, to target people's speech. Now, we are all against incitement to violence. We are all against incitement to hatred of a kind that can harm people. But in the absence of a definition of hatred, and in a society dominated by cancel culture now, where people are frequently accused of being haters for expressing points of view that are not hate, simply robust expressions of opinion. We had the honour, some of us, of listening today to Dr. Helen Joyce, who briefed some of us. She's the Braeborn author of Transgender Identity and the New Battle for Women's Rights. She and many others have been cancelled, denied a forum in university for simply speaking the truth about gender. And she is one of the many people that has concerns about the impact of this legislation. I don't know if she's in the gallery. I would welcome if she was, because she has done the state some service by her work. So Minister, what about a definition of hatred? Since there is such a thing as extreme hate speech, and there's also hate speech that should be dealt with through measures of a non-legal nature, what about a definition to put people at ease? Let's not hide behind the hope of a benign prosecution service. When the social media mob is on the rampage, the Gardaí and the prosecution service will have little choice but to pursue the Graham Linehans and the J.K. Rowlings of Irish society for robustly expressing their points of view. Of course, I should not have to make this plea. Freedom of expression is a fundamental human right. Without it, there's no free exchange of ideas at all levels within society. In short, there's no democracy. And that's why we use the term fundamental. Freedom of expression doesn't just apply to information or ideas that are favourably received or regarded as inoffensive or as a matter of indifference, but also to those that offend, shock or disturb the state or any sector of the population. That again is from the Council of Europe, but there's no nod to that kind of standard in your legislation. Your office's letter to an inquirer suggests that freedom of expression can be limited or restricted by law for compelling reasons, including protecting other fundamental human rights. But the right not to be offended is not and never will be a fundamental right. But one can sense in this legislation, and I hope I'm wrong on this, a surreptitious attempt to set a new international standard, one which might be applicable to all social media companies and their users all across Europe. There is no doubt that undefined hate speech creates a dilemma for social media companies who, conscious of Irish law, will be obliged to err on the side of caution and thus will bring down a dark pall on freedom of expression throughout Europe. That's what's called the chilling effect. And it is that that has so many people worried about the legislation. Because it's not in the end a question of who will be prosecuted to the point of being convicted. It is who will be prosecuted or harassed in the first instance by the forces of law and order and put through a process which is in itself the punishment, simply for robustly expressing the point of view. And it's not those of us who have parliamentary privilege. It's the ordinary Joe or Jane who perhaps doesn't always express themselves as eloquently. Maybe even they express themselves rudely or crudely. But they have the right to express themselves in a democracy. It's important that we are able to tolerate things that offend our ears, provided, of course, that they are not harming people or exposing people to harm. But you have put no such test into the legislation. You have put in a word that you refuse to define. And whatever about hatred being undefined in the 1989 legislation, it's so much more serious that it's undefined now, because we are in the context of cancel culture, where we see people trying to shut each other down. And it's precisely because of that that the expansion of this legislation to include a radical new definition of gender, that to my mind in many ways at the core of this bill, because we are right in the middle of the culture wars there. We're in the very place where people want to close each other down. One doesn't expect the government, frankly, to present a revolutionary new definition of such an important term as gender in a criminal law bill. It is unprecedented. It's not been discussed to date. It escaped Dáil's scrutiny. And despite my and other senators' attempts to find out from your predecessor what that definition means, we've been unsuccessful. I'd like people... No, thank you, Barry. I would like us all to pause for a moment to take this in. Gender will now mean, quote, the gender of a person or the gender which a person expresses as the person's preferred gender or with which the person identifies and includes transgender and a gender other than those are male and female. Now, even in the 2015 legislation, transgender meant you chose one or other of the existing genders. This redefines all that and creates further new realities. There's about 105 currently internet listed. Amagender, acegender, agender, androgyne, apogender, astronomique, Cookie gender, gender cast, fluid queer, one that I can't politely render here, hyperfluid, etc. And all of this is now being landed right into the middle of a criminal law, potentially, where somebody could be attacked for being a hater, for stating in robust, but necessarily robust terms, that not only is this nonsense, it is dangerous nonsense, it is nonsense that puts children at risk when it's imported to the curriculum of schools, and we saw that the National Council for Curriculum and Assessment was moving in that direction when it was originally talking about presenting gender as a spectrum. All this stuff that's not evidence-based, that has parents worrying around the country, and you landed right in the middle of a hate speech bill which doesn't even define hatred, and you wonder why people are worried about their freedom of expression in a democracy. Insofar as this means anything, the gender binary is no longer what the state wishes to protect. It's the opposite. The time-honoured scientific binary definition will no longer be the preferred one under this legislation. And it's not simply that a new understanding of gender is being recognised, it's being afforded the title of protected characteristic, which leads to questions about whether consistent non-conformity to preferred pronouns will bring the threat of prosecution on someone. Will mocking memes be tolerated? Robust campaigning by parents against inappropriate school curricula be allowed? Will carrying a placard saying men can't breastfeed warrant a hate speech investigation, or up to 5 years imprisonment and a lifelong label as a criminal hater and all the stigma and life limitation that goes with that? Nobody actually knows, Minister. Someone intimated that the conflation of gender, gender expression and gender identity arose as an attempt to limit the number of protected characteristics. Well, as I say, in the light of what I said, it has done nothing but extend the risk. And it is the vagueness at the heart of this bill. It is the non-definition of hatred that is the real weapon here, because it creates the uncertainty in ordinary people's minds about what they may say or may not say in a cancel culture, as I said, where people are called haters, where you will have people piling on people if they say something that's unpopular, calling on the Gardaí to investigate. All of that pressure. When you have existing legislation that could be carefully amended, the 1989 legislation, where you have the public order legislation that could be amended if necessary to give effect, to get the more prosecutions that we've been told you want without giving us any practical day-to-day examples of things that should have been prosecuted successfully but which weren't. So for all those reasons, it would be impossible for people who are concerned about this bill to accept it at second stage, Minister, and I sincerely hope that you and your officials will have a rethink about what you're pushing through the Shannon these days. Gurmila Mahagat.
Chair, welcome to the Chamber, and I think it's been a really interesting debate so far, and it shows the breadth of views in this House, and I think all views have been expressed, for the most part, I think, reasonably and fairly, and are to be respected across all sides. There are many things that won't be said in the Chamber, Minister, because I think the point that Senator Mullen made about cancel culture is real. And there are many topics that many of us are afraid to speak about publicly or speak about in the Chamber, but we say it outside and we say it in the hallways and people say it to us. So the issues being raised in this are real and they're genuine. And it's not from crazy people, it's not from far left or far right. There are many ordinary middle ground people that are not quite sure what we're legislating for, if it's needed, if it's reasonable, are we doing what we're required to do, are we going further than that? They're reasonable questions. That doesn't make you a bad person, it doesn't make you a hateful person, and it doesn't mean that you want to restrict the rights of any other persons or indeed prevent them from being safe to walk the streets in our country. I think most people here are united in wanting to see hate crime legislation, absolutely. It's the hate speech element that's causing the most difficulty, because there is an element of vagueness around it, that's just fact. The lack of a definition for hate, I can understand why that's problematic for people. I also take on board the Attorney General's advice, and I understand the rationale as to why it hasn't been defined. But it does present a level of subjectivity that makes people nervous, and that's understandable. That doesn't make you a bad person. They are reasonable issues for legislators to raise in this House. So I think it would be helpful, Minister, because in the absence of a definition, as you'll be aware, these debates might be referred to in the courts when looking to the intent of us as legislators as what we wanted to enact. So it is important that we would discuss it, because I have the briefing note, but it's not on the record of the House. So I think it would be welcome to maybe just elaborate a little bit further, not just the Attorney General's advice, but the fact that there's a kind of a definition, but not really, just that it's what people generally understand it to be. Because this legislation, you've spoken, Minister, about the current statute, the current legislation, it's quite old. So I think this particular law that we're going to pass, and I think that it probably will pass, will be on the statute books for a very, very long time. So what we reasonably understand hate to mean today could be different in 10 years, 20 years or 30 years' time. So we need to legislate and make sure that it can stand the test of time. And that's what's being debated here. I think on the issues of gender, and I'll be very limited in what I say on this, because again, that's a space that no matter what you say, you'll upset somebody, because it is so controversial and so divisive. Whether you think it should be or shouldn't be, it simply is. It's happened across in the UK, it's coming in here, there are different views. And I think that there are lots of issues that are being conflated and kind of bundled in together that, taken individually, are reasonable issues to raise and are often taken to mean a hatred of one group when it's not that at all. And I'll say as much as I've said on that front. But again, we should be able to discuss these issues openly, and we can't. Actually, unless you have a particular viewpoint, you can't say what you actually think. And I'm very concerned that we're going towards a situation where we're telling people how to think, how they should think, and if you don't think how I think, there's something wrong with you. And, you know, I would be considered, I think, on the Liberal side of things in my own party, and that's evidenced by my position on marriage equality, on the 8th Amendment. So I'm coming from a particular place, but I'm always very conscious that the views that I hold today were not acceptable 40 years ago. And I was contacted by quite a number of people. There's a particular group saying, I think they're called Not All Gays, and people that have campaigned for progressive change in this country that have raised genuine concerns that I think we should air in the chamber and just address those concerns. They've said to me that if those restrictions were in place, would I have been able to advocate and change the minds of people that had a different view to me to bring about the change that means I have better protections today? It was a really interesting point. It was a different angle, I hadn't come across it, and it was from somebody, a young man in my constituency, who I've spoken to, and I take him at face value that it was just a genuinely held view. So I think the idea that all of the LGBTQ+I community all think the same on this is not correct, and I just wanted to put that on the record as well. Minister, I take on board the defences in this legislation, but I would ask if you could maybe elaborate on. So Section 7 is the incitement to violence or hatred section, where it talks about the lowering of the test. It's no longer just intent, it's recklessness. That is a significant change in terms of what's required to prove the offence. And I understand why you're doing it, because currently the legislation makes it difficult to prosecute. So I understand all of that. So I'm just wondering how that marries then with Section 11, which is the protection of freedom of expression. Because in fairness to the Minister and to the Government, there has been a genuine attempt to put in black and white in the legislation that for the purposes of the Act, any material or behaviour is not taken to incite violence or hatred against a person or a group of persons on account of their protected characteristics, or any of those characteristics solely on the basis that the material or behaviour includes or involves discussion or criticism of matters relating to a person's protected characteristics. So, as you've said, it's okay to be offensive. We can't force people to be kind, we can't force people to be decent. We shouldn't legislate for that either, actually, because, as one person pointed out, I'd rather know how they think, and then it gives me an opportunity to change their mind. And maybe they'll never change their mind, but I'd rather know, as opposed to not know. I think the point that's been made that this legislation will have a chilling effect, I would agree with that. Maybe we're okay with that. That's to be decided. But it certainly will prompt some people to err on the side of caution, because they can't be sure that what they are saying, even though it may be offensive, we may think it's disgraceful or disgusting or whatever you want to call it, all it takes is for one person, it seems, and maybe you can correct me on this, to act on the basis of that and do something that is criminal. So what is offensive and what we deem to be inappropriate language that is part of a debate, we may not like what the person is saying. What happens if one of their followers, or some person that's a fanatic, or somebody that's just not a reasonable person, acts on that? How does the defence come into play in that situation? I've been asked the question, I can't answer it, so I'm asking you as Minister to answer that question. I just made a couple of notes as I was going through, but I'm just very conscious listening to the debate so far, and I know there will be other contributions. Everyone should be allowed to make their point in here, and we shouldn't be denigrated or judged for making those points. And assumptions shouldn't be made either as to where a person stands on a particular issue or aspect of the legislation. It should be taken at face value for what they've said. But certainly there is a minority of voices in this chamber that actually represent a lot of views outside the chamber that sometimes doesn't get acknowledged. And I feel that I'm in the fortunate position of often being on the side now of the popular view, whatever that might be. But that might change when, you know, on pension age, maybe the views will be different. And we want to make sure that all views can be expressed at all times because it protects all of us. And that was what we needed 30, 40 years ago when we wanted to try and stop the 8th Amendment going into the Constitution. People couldn't walk the streets in this country because their view was unpopular. And we don't want the same to happen to people that hold views we don't like today. So, Minister, just to conclude by saying if you can please elaborate further on why we're not defining hate and maybe the potential challenges that might ensue. If you can give your views on the potential chilling effect, that I think is a reasonable point to make. If we can also hear from you the Council decision, the Council framework decision, basically what's required of us from the European Union. Can you please put on the record what precisely is required? We've all got the briefing document, but it's important that it's on the record. What is required of us from the European Union? Are we doing just enough, or are we going further? Just to, again, have that on the record. We all know the answer to that because we're privy to lots of briefing documents and we're well resourced, and that's good for us. And might I also add that in the legislation, we're protected because we can speak in here and it's political activity. So we're very protected in what we say. But are the general public receiving the same protections? And then the public consultation, Minister, if you can just confirm that that was in the context of the hate crime and hate speech elements, or was it just the hate crime element? Obviously the consultation was very good, it was very extensive and went on for quite a period, and we make a virtue of the fact that we consulted widely, but just to make sure that the consultation covered all aspects of the legislation, or was it just an element of it? And I think that's all of my contribution for now, but I will come back in, and I hope, Minister, that genuine consideration will be given to Shannon amendments that are genuinely brought with good intent, and that they are given the time and opportunity, and that I won't be requested to expedite the legislation through this House, that members will be given ample time to discuss all aspects of it and table as many amendments as they so wish.